Hexen was my second most favorite first-person shooter on the Nintendo 64. Yep, right behind GoldenEye. But that game is better known as Hexen Beyond Heretic for the PC. As the name implies, it was a follow-up to Heretic, which I reviewed in this channel a while ago. It was originally a 1995 DOS release, which received an expansion in 1996, then the console ports in 1997. Having played both the original PC release and the console ports, I think they've done an exceptional job with porting to the Nintendo 64 in particular. It ran relatively smooth and looked pretty damn close to the PC original. The game played well with the Nintendo 64 controller, and that version featured exclusive split-screen 4-player multiplayer, which was always a blast, and exclusive arrangements of the tracks that sounded uniquely somber and symphonic. Unfortunately, the sound quality was also very crummy, like many third-party games sounded on the system, but I can look past that since the soundtrack itself was easily the best rendition of Hexen music in my opinion. And let's not forget the exclusive loading screens making you wait longer when entering portals. Who doesn't love loading screens? But at least the Nintendo 64 version used the loading times to add something to the experience with these cool short descriptions of the areas you're entering. The PlayStation 7 ports by Probe only had the loading times with none of the text. And speaking of those ports, good grief were they bad. The PS1 port is simply atrocious. It looked and ran very poorly. The enemy AI was weird and the levels had changes that only made the experience worse. And interestingly, the Saturn port looked and ran slightly better between the two in my experience. Clearly, boomer shooters were just too powerful for the PlayStation. Some people might still prefer the DOS original exactly the way it was, and they think the goofy looking CGI intro is a mandatory part of the experience the Nintendo 64 port lacks, and that's fine. It's okay to have bad opinions. And some people prefer the Saturn or PlayStation ports, which is not fine. The heck is wrong with those people? But none of that matters because last year Bethesda published a 2-in-1 remaster pack of Heretic and Hexen, and this is hands down the definitive way to experience the games now. All those older versions and their fans can go straight to the trash where they belong. The story of Hexen takes place directly after Heretic, and focuses on the second of the three Serpent Riders, Corax, who seems to share a name with a Star Trek character. Coincidence? Or maybe they're the same being! Ooh! Corax invades the world of Hexen. According to the CGI intro, Hexen is ruled by three corrupt leaders gifted with magic. They submit themselves in exchange for eternal life and dark powers. It's up to the three heroes, former apprentices of the three rulers, to save the world of Hexen. The warrior Baratus, who is very appropriately named, the cleric Parias, who is a terrible character for most of the game, and the mage Daedalon, who I think is a highlight in terms of arsenal. Each character has different attributes in terms of damage taken and speed, and they have completely separate arsenals, but you go through the same levels and stories no matter who you choose. Hexen is what is now called a boomer shooter, since if you say classic FPS, a lot of people only think as early as Half-Life, which is a very different beast from these types of shooters. You explore levels for health pickups, items with all sorts of different uses that go into an inventory you activate manually like an adventure game, and find keys or switches to press to solve puzzles or avoid getting yourself killed in death traps. All of this has to be done while hordes of monsters charge at you from all over. You can aim vertically, and the remaster can even use gyro aiming, but the game tends to autocorrect your vertical aiming, so it's not super important. You can usually get away with just aiming horizontally, keeping your speed set to run as long as possible, and making good use of strafing to dodge attacks. Every attack can be dodged if you're good at it, and I mean every attack. This is a 90s shooter with no hit-scan enemies. That alone makes me appreciate the combat in Hexen more than the combat in every other boomer shooter not called Doom. For those who don't know what hit-scan means, it's an attack that instantly hits you. They can't be dodged. Hit-scanning can be done well sometimes. Doom 1 and 2 feature hit-scan enemies as early as in their first levels, but not all enemies attack that way, and the level design accounts for the need to take cover. Also, arc vials from Doom 2 are probably the most clever implementation of hit-scan in gaming. That's good design because it discourages you from relying on the exact same strategy for every enemy. When the only thing you can do is kill them before they kill you, then that's just cheap. Games like Duke Nukem 3D love to put you in that kind of situation, and that's one reason you'll probably never see me review that game. Some people find Hexen's combat too easy and repetitive due to the lack of hit scanners, and I can see that, but I prefer no hit scanning at all over abusing them to add artificial difficulty spikes. Even with the lack of hit scan, you'll probably have a hard time with the bosses. Compared to the bosses in the other shooters of the early to mid-90s, I found Hexen's bosses much more difficult. There is more going on than just aiming and dodging with some of them. Hexen distances itself more from Doom compared to Heretic. The exploration is more heavily emphasized, and that might be why there aren't any hit-scan enemies. There is more focus on making the maps look and feel like dungeons and dark fantasy locales like forests, swamps, and monasteries. Unfortunately, this game also differs from Doom in that you have a jump button, and the game really wants you to use it. Which means sometimes you run into platforming sections where missing a jump means death. And when playing with a controller, if you don't tilt your analog stick very gently, you will be sprinting, which makes every platforming section feel like a nice level. You eventually get used to it, but there will be a lot of growing pains. Pretty much every level has some kind of a trap somewhere, although most are going to instantly kill you, and there is more focus on activating switches than unlocking doors with colorful keys. You do still track keys to progress, but there are way fewer of those. The game is split into hubs, each with 3 or 4 levels each, and the keys you find are used across the entire set of levels. Sometimes one key will unlock doors in multiple levels, and very often a switch you find in a level will do something that lets you progress further in a different level. That's right, Hexen features a lot of backtracking. It's like each hub map is its own mini Metroidvania, but without the Metroid and the Castlevania aspects. The key and switch tracking could get extremely tedious in the original release, but thanks to the remaster's quality of life features, you get some much needed markers pointing you to portals leading to levels that still have objectives to be completed, or even the location of keys you haven't picked up. To be fair, the levels in Hexen are relatively small. There are only a handful of really bad layouts that are designed like confusing mazes. Each level is also designed very differently from another. They all have some kind of theme going on. The most well-known unique feature in Hexen are your character choices. As I mentioned before, they each have their different stats and weapons to use. Their individual selections are way smaller than of other shooters of the 90s, but their weapons have completely different behavior and so does their usage of the flashlight item. This was originally something that added a lot of replay value to the game. Your experience would be different based on who you picked. That's still the case with Remaster, but there is one key new feature that completely changes how this class is and synergizes with the player progression. The Class Change Tomb. Every hub contains a tomb that you can interact with to change between the 3 characters. You don't lose any item, artifact, key, or weapon by doing so. In fact, if you unlock a new weapon for a character you're not controlling, once you change to that character using the tomb, you have that weapon already unlocked. This adds an entire extra layer of character progression to the game, because everything you pick up becomes useful, and the more weapons you unlock, the more options you have to explore levels or defeat bosses more easily. Generally speaking, the warrior is the easiest to start with, since every weapon besides the starter costs mana to be used, except for the warrior's weapons, which will still work as melee weapons. And he's the tankiest character, making the combination of good melee damage and good sustain fairly easy to handle while you get used to strafing and aiming better. The mage starting weapon has awful damage, but his unlockable weapons are very interesting. They don't just inflict bursts of damage at the enemies, they also have some kind of additional effect like freezing enemies or causing damage over time. I think his weapons are the most fun, but it can be easy to get carried away and lose mana faster than with the other 2. The cleric is completely worthless until you have most if not all his weapons unlocked. His melee damage is terrible, his first magic weapon is still really weak, and its health absorption can even make up for how much damage he takes from enemies. But his final weapon is the most powerful in the game. He's so worthless they try to make him better by adding a shield that can be used in conjunction with the mace weapon. But the mace sucks so bad I never saw any point in the shield existing after the first level. I guess it could be useful when you find yourself in a situation where you won't be able to dodge an incoming attack or trap and you think you can swap to mace and shield quick enough. The remaster did come with a new exclusive expansion, so maybe the new levels highlight the real point of having the shield. The mana assistant is also very interesting. None of the weapons use ammo types, you have 2 mana pools, blue and green. Mana pickups come in blue, green and combined forms. There is plenty of it, so there is rarely a situation where you might feel hesitant to use the right weapon for the job because you run out of ammo like in other shooters. You can also use flash shot to damage enemies, which functions like grenades or bombs. Or you can turn enemies into pigs. Just like heretics, you can use items and artifacts from your inventory to heal yourself or do other things like teleporting back to the entrance of a level. One of the better features in Hexen is the multiplayer. There is a deathmatch mode which enables secret areas and traps that don't exist in the normal mode. But you can also play the normal campaign and still intentionally hunt each other down because you all want to be the main character and there can be only one. At least if we were playing on the Nintendo 64 that was the case. In the remaster you can only hurt each other if you play on deathmatch. Graphically, it is what it is. This is as boomery shootery as it gets. 3D environments with 2D objects and enemies. Everything that's 2D can look really blocky often even with the remaster's improvements. But the music is awesome. They made new arrangements for the soundtrack. I don't know if I find them more fitting than the Nintendo 64 music, but I like most of what I heard. It's not all purely metalhead stuff, which I really appreciate since not trying to make it sound like Doom can only help Hexen keep an identity of its own as a game. Let's have a quick listen and compare editions of a couple tracks from the original Hexen, the Nintendo 64 version and the remaster. I'm not including the renditions from the PS1 or Saturn ports because that would have been an assault on your ears. Which version sounds better? You decide. Actually, I'll decide for you, it's the remaster. But I think a few tracks still sound more appropriate in the Nintendo 64 port. I think some people still take for granted that if a game is remastered, that version will always be the definitive way to play. But we don't live in a world where that's true at all. Sometimes the remaster runs worse than the original, features new bugs, or changes some aspects of the game that conflicts with the original vision or appeal of the experience. I played very little of the Heretic remaster because, quite frankly, I don't think Heretic is that good of a game. But I can vouch for the definitiveness of this Hexen Remaster. If you already know you dislike boomer shooters, this game isn't going to change your mind. But I guess that depends on why you don't like boomer shooters. If the lack of hit scanners, the less egregious reliance on fighting keys, the inventory and class systems make you reconsider, you should give Hexen a try. If you think boomer shooters should be nothing but fast-paced, arcade-like experience like Doom, Hexen might be too boring for you, at least on a first playthrough. For everyone else, I guess if you like what you see, try it. The remaster pack goes for $15 when not on sale, and only because Heretic comes along like a clingy parasite. Just remember to always save your game manually before a platforming segment, because Hexen levels love to make you jump, and the autosave seems to only save right after you go through a portal. Those are my thoughts about the Hexen Remaster. What about you? Any comments about Hexen, boomer shooters, hit scanners, or anything else I mentioned here? We'd love to read your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and take care.